At the promotion meeting, I smiled and said, "I can't wait to get my raise." My husband, the boss, chuckled. "A raise? Oh no. I awarded it to your sister. HR confirmed I was never even considered." My sister smirked, forgot to mention me. That afternoon, I cleared out my desk. But what I did afterward, nobody saw coming at all. Have you ever had a moment where your entire world, the one you built brick by painful brick, was shattered into a million pieces by the very people you trusted most? Because mine was, and it happened on what was supposed to be the best day of my professional life, in a way I could never have imagined. You know, for months, I'd had that Thursday circled in blood red ink on my calendar. It was the day. The big promotion meeting. I woke up before my alarm, the sun barely a whisper on the horizon. I can still feel the cool hardwood floor under my feet as I padded into the kitchen, making Preston his coffee, just the way he liked it. 2 sugars, no cream, left it on the counter for him. In that quiet, hopeful moment, I truly believed this was it. This was the day everything would change. All the sacrifices, all the endless hours, they were finally going to pay off. And believe me, there had been sacrifices. For 8 long months, I had been the glue holding our company together. That's not an exaggeration. It was a cold, hard fact. The portfolio in my hands felt heavy as I got ready, not from the paper itself, but from the weight of all those late nights. The dinners I missed with my daughter before she left for college, the sheer, unadulterated effort I'd poured into every single page. I'd personally saved the Campbell Industries account, a $2 million a quarter contract. I didn't do it with some clever trick. I did it by working until 3 a.m. for 2 straight weeks, living on stale coffee and pure adrenaline, anticipating every client need before they even knew they had them. I managed the Morrison Hotels crisis, flying to 3 different cities in 48 hours, putting out fires before the story ever hit the news. I completely overhauled our digital marketing strategy from the ground up, a project everyone else said was too ambitious, and increased our engagement by a staggering 340%. So when I walked into that conference room an hour later, I was practically floating. The air buzzed with nervous energy, but I just smiled at the leadership team. My team, the people whose departments I'd supported, whose mistakes I'd quietly fixed. My eyes found Preston, my husband, sitting at the head of the long mahogany table. He was the CEO, the man I'd built this company with, my husband of 12 years. I caught his eye, gave him a little wink, meant just for him, and with a laugh bubbling up from pure anticipation, I said, "I can't wait for my raise." A few people chuckled politely, but Preston just laughed. It wasn't a warm, shared laugh. It was hollow, distant, amused. He looked up from his phone, that device that seemed permanently attached to his hand these days, and the expression on his face made my chest tighten into a cold, hard knot. It wasn't pride. It wasn't approval. It was pure, undisguised amusement. And it was at my expense. He set his phone down with a deliberate, theatrical slowness that made the air in the room thick and hard to breathe. "Raise?" he said, his voice carrying across the silent room. "Oh no, Lorraine. I gave it to your sister." The fluorescent lights overhead suddenly felt too bright, too harsh, like an interrogation lamp. They illuminated every face turned toward me, a gallery of pity, discomfort, and morbid curiosity. My sister Cassidy, my younger sister, the one I'd helped with her homework, whose first resume I'd written, the one I'd personally recommended for an entry-level position here 3 years ago, as a favor. Bethany from HR, a woman whose children I'd babysat during a family emergency, cleared her throat. The sound was unnaturally loud. She slid a thin manila folder across the polished table. It stopped a few inches from my multi-million-dollar portfolio, now clutched uselessly against my chest. Her perfectly manicured nails, a shade of pale pink I'd complimented just last week, tapped against the cover twice. "You weren't even considered for the position, Lorraine," she said, her gaze fixed on a point somewhere over my left shoulder. "The decision was made last week." And at that exact moment, as if on cue in some horribly written play, the heavy glass doors of the conference room swung open. In walked Cassidy. She was wearing a brand new blood-red power suit, the kind of suit you wear when you want to make a statement, when you want to draw blood. She caught my eye as she walked towards the empty, high-backed leather chair next to Preston. The luxury seat, as we used to joke. The one reserved for the director of strategic marketing. My chair. She offered me the slightest shrug. A dismissive little gesture that wasn't an apology, but a declaration of victory. It broke my heart into a million tiny, sharp pieces. "Forgot to mention it," she said, her voice dripping with a false sympathy that was more insulting than any gloating could have been. She settled into her new chair, crossing her legs, the picture of effortless success. That afternoon, I cleared my desk. It was a surreal out-of-body experience. The orchid I'd nursed through 2 brutal winters, coaxing it back to life. The coffee mug my daughter Paige had given me that read "World's Best Multitasking Mom," the framed photo from our company, retreat where I'd been named Employee of the Quarter. For the 3rd consecutive time, a photo where Preston was standing beside me, his arm around my shoulders, beaming with pride. Or so I had thought. I packed them all into a sad brown cardboard box. But what I did afterward, what I began to plan in the ashes of that humiliation, nobody, least of all them, saw it coming. The drive home was a blur of traffic lights and familiar turns that my body made without any input from my brain. 17 minutes. That's all it took to travel from the center of my professional universe to the ruins of my personal one. Each landmark, the bakery on the corner, the old oak tree in the park, seemed to mock me. Relics from a life that had ceased to exist the moment Preston uttered those words. Our house. The one we'd poured our life savings into. The one in that beautiful tree-lined neighborhood in Portland where we were supposed to grow old together. It felt like a stranger's house. The air inside was stale and silent. The kitchen, with its dated countertops and peeling linoleum, still needed renovating. We'd been putting it off, waiting for this very promotion, for the substantial salary increase that would come with it. Now I realized with a bitter pang it would stay exactly as it was, a monument to a future that would never happen. I set the box of my office life on the dining room table. The thud echoed in the silence. For a moment, I just stood there staring at it. My entire career, my identity for the last 12 years, reduced to a cardboard box. A strange cold calm washed over me. It was the calm of shock, the kind of numbness that precedes a world of pain. My eyes drifted towards the open door of Preston's home office. And there it was. Lying on top of a stack of papers on his desk, as casual as a grocery list. The Campbell Industries contract. My feet moved before my mind did, carrying me across the room as if in a dream. I picked it up. The margins were filled with notes, but it wasn't Preston's angular, hurried scroll. These were looping, careful, almost childishly rounded letters. Cassidy's handwriting. I saw dates scrawled next to some of the notes, going back 6 weeks. 6 weeks. Strategy notes about customer engagement approaches I developed. Client relationship details I'd painstakingly built over years. It was all there. My intellectual property being dissected and claimed by my own sister, under my own roof. The casual, breathtaking cruelty of it stole the air from my lungs. For the past month, while I'd been a bundle of nerves and excitement, practicing my promotion presentation in the shower, calculating how the pay raise would finally let us fix the leaking roof and maybe even take a real vacation. My husband had been secretly training my replacement, my sister. He had sat across from me at this very dining table, listening to me rehearse my talking points, nodding encouragingly. "That's a strong opening, Lorraine," he'd said. He'd looked over my portfolio layout, suggesting a different font. "This is brilliant, honey. They're going to be blown away." He had made love to me just last night, holding me in his arms, without ever once mentioning that the next day he was going to publicly execute my career. The front door opened at 6:47 p.m., Preston's usual time. His keys hit the ceramic bowl by the entrance with their familiar, cheerful clink, a sound I used to love. His footsteps moved through the foyer, paused for a beat as he surely saw my box on the dining table, then continued into the kitchen. I was standing there, holding a chef's knife, a half-chopped bell pepper on the cutting board in front of me. The motion was automatic, a phantom limb of a normal life. "Hey," he said, loosening his tie as he walked past me. "What's for dinner?" The absolute stunning normality of the question made my hand tighten on the knife. He moved behind me to get a beer from the refrigerator, his cologne filling the small space between us. The same expensive cologne I bought him for Christmas, selected because it smelled like confidence and success. Now it smelled like lies. "Preston," I said, setting the knife down very carefully on the counter. I turned to face him. "We need to talk about today." He popped the beer cap against the granite countertop. A habit I'd asked him 100 times to stop because it left little marks. He took a long, slow drink, his eyes avoiding mine. "What about today?" he asked, his voice deliberately casual. "The promotion?" I said, my own voice trembling slightly. "Cassidy, The fact that you've been handing my work over to her for weeks while I prepared a presentation you knew was utterly pointless. He let out a long, weary sigh, the kind he always used when he was about to explain to me why my feelings were irrational. Lorraine, I told you the board had concerns about appearances. It's a conflict of interest. A husband promoting his wife? It just doesn't look good, especially with the Fletcher acquisition coming up. The Fletcher acquisition? I stared at him incredulous. The acquisition I structured, the one where I spent 3 weeks courting their CMO to make sure the transition would be smooth? That acquisition, which is exactly why we need someone like Cassidy in that role, he said, taking another swig of beer. Someone without personal connections that could be seen as a conflict. Someone like Cassidy, I repeated, my voice dripping with sarcasm. The woman who asked me last week what ROI stands for? She's leading a multi-million-dollar acquisition. She's using my frameworks, my client relationships, taking credit for campaigns I built at 3 a.m. while you slept peacefully beside me. That's how business works, Lorraine, he said, his voice flat and cold. There was no apology in his eyes, no flicker of guilt, just the cold, hard wall of his decision. You knew there would be complicated situations when we got married. Just then, the doorbell rang. Sharp, intrusive, it made us both jump. It rang again, followed by a series of quick, impatient knocks. I'll get it, I said, my voice barely a whisper. I needed to escape the suffocating air in that kitchen. I walked to the front door and pulled it open, expecting a package. Delivery, a neighbor. Anyone but the person standing on my porch. It was Cassidy. She'd changed out of her red power suit and was now in a ridiculously expensive set of yoga clothes that probably cost more than my first car. Her smile was different now, brighter, more genuine, like we were just two sisters, best friends, about to go grab coffee. Hi, Lorraine. Hope I'm not interrupting dinner, she chirped, her eyes flicking past me into the house. Behind me, I heard Preston's footsteps approaching. Cassidy, what are you doing here? You left this at the office, she said, pulling his personal laptop from an oversized designer purse. She wasn't talking to me. She was talking to him. You said you needed it for the Fletcher presentation tomorrow morning. She handed him the laptop. Their fingers brushed in the exchange. It was a small, insignificant gesture, but it was practiced. Familiar. Intimate. My stomach turned over. Thanks, he said, his voice a little too tight. I completely forgot. No problem, she said, her gaze finally settling on me. About tomorrow's presentation, should I use Lorraine's deck as a starting point or just create something fresh? Create something fresh, Preston said without a moment's hesitation. We need a new perspective. Her attention shifted to me fully then, her face a perfect mask of corporate sympathy. Lorraine, I'm really, truly sorry about today. I know it must have been unexpected, but I'm sure you understand deep down that it's what's best for everyone. The perfectly chosen, meaningless, soul-crushing words. I just smiled. The same polished professional smile I had perfected in 1,000 hostile meetings. Of course, Cassidy, I said, my voice perfectly, terrifyingly even. I understand perfectly. After she left, a trail of expensive perfume lingering in the air, Preston closed the door and turned to me, a look of strained reasonableness on his face. See, she's just trying to be professional about this whole thing. Professional? I repeated the word, tasting like poison in my mouth. Is that what we're calling showing up at my house in workout clothes to deliver a laptop you could have easily survived without until tomorrow? Don't make this something it's not, he warned, his voice low. But I was already walking away, heading upstairs. In our walk-in closet, I pulled down my large suitcase, the one we bought for our honeymoon in Maui 12 years ago. I opened it on the bed. Preston appeared in the doorway, his forgotten beer still in his hand. What are you doing? Getting some space, I said, pulling sweaters from a drawer and folding them with numb precision. Lorraine, don't be dramatic, he sighed. It's just a job. I paused, holding a soft cashmere sweater Paige had given me for Christmas. I turned to face him, my eyes finally meeting his. You're right, I said, my voice dangerously quiet. It's just a job. And this is just a marriage where my husband orchestrates my professional humiliation. And that was just my sister stopping by our house after dark. Nothing dramatic about that at all. He stood there watching me as I packed up 12 years of my life. He didn't say a word to stop me. He just watched. And in his silence, I heard everything I needed to know. That night, I didn't just pack a suitcase. I packed a grudge. And in the sterile quiet of my sister Beverly's guest room, I started making a plan. Just before I fell into a restless sleep, I checked my banking app. A cold dread washed over me. The joint savings account, the one containing the bulk of our liquid assets, had a balance of 0. He had transferred everything out. And then I saw the email notification from the bank. Subject: account closure request processed. He hadn't just pushed me out of the company. He had locked me out of my own life. My first night of exile was spent at my older sister Beverly's house. She opened the door, took one look at my face and the suitcase in my hand, and simply pulled me into a fierce hug. She didn't ask questions, just led me to her guest room, a quiet, peaceful space that felt like a sanctuary. But sleep wouldn't come. I lay on the clean, crisp sheets, staring at the unfamiliar ceiling, the full weight of my new reality crashing down on me. I had no job. My marriage was a lie. My own sister had orchestrated my downfall. And now I had no money. Preston had been methodical. He hadn't just blindsided me. He had financially crippled me. The next morning, driven by a desperate, foolish hope, I did the one thing I thought I could still count on. I called my parents. I just needed to hear my mother's voice, to be told that this was all a terrible mistake, that they were on my side. "Mom," I said, my voice cracking, betraying the calm I was trying to maintain. Something terrible happened. I laid it all out in a torrent of choked words. The meeting, Preston's coldness, Cassidy's smug smile, the years of my work just handed over like a party favor. I told her about the frozen bank account, the feeling of absolute devastation. I waited for the explosion of maternal rage on my behalf, for the sympathy, for the promise that she and Dad would be on the next flight out to Portland. Instead, there was a long, heavy silence on the other end of the line. A silence so profound I thought the call had dropped. "Lorraine," my mother finally said, her voice strained and thin, "are you absolutely sure you're not overreacting?" The blood drained from my face. I felt dizzy. "Overreacting, Mom? He gave my job to Cassidy in front of the entire leadership team. He locked me out of our savings." "Well," she said, and I could hear the faint, rumbling murmur of my father in the background coaching her. "Preston is a very successful man, a CEO. He's under a lot of pressure. He must have his reasons. And Cassidy? She's always looked up to you so much. Maybe you should see this as a chance for you to mentor her, to guide her." I couldn't form words. My throat closed up. "Mentor her, Mom? She conspired with my husband to steal my career. They're having an affair." The words tumbled out before I could stop them. "Now, Lorraine, don't use such dramatic, ugly language," my mother chided, her voice turning sharp. "You have no proof of that. You've always been so ambitious, so intense. It can be a lot for a man to handle. Maybe this is a sign you should slow down. Focus on being a wife. Cassidy is just better at being supportive. She knows how to make a man like Preston feel important. Perhaps you should learn a little from your sister. Know how to be softer, more agreeable with your husband." I hung up the phone without saying goodbye. It felt like I'd been slapped harder than any physical blow. It wasn't just a betrayal from my husband and my sister anymore. It was from my own parents. They had chosen a side, and it wasn't mine. They had always favored Cassidy, the pretty, charming one, while I was the serious, driven one. I see now that my success hadn't made them proud. It had made them uncomfortable. It had highlighted everything Cassidy wasn't. That night, huddled in the safety of Beverly's guest room, I realized I was utterly, completely alone. The despair was a physical thing, a heavy blanket threatening to suffocate me. I cried until I had no tears left, until my body was just a hollowed-out shell of exhaustion and grief. This was rock bottom. This was the point where you either shatter completely or you start to piece yourself back together into something harder, something sharper. And as the first gray light of dawn filtered through the window, a different feeling began to stir in the pit of my stomach, overriding the grief. It was rage. A cold, hard, clarifying rage. A rage that burned away the tears and left behind a core of pure, unadulterated steel. They had pushed me off a cliff into the darkest abyss. They just didn't realize they'd given me wings on the way down. Beverly's quiet suburban house became my war room. She was my rock, silently providing coffee, food, and the space I needed to think. My first challenge was a practical one. I was an army with no weapons. My access to the company servers had been revoked, my email locked, my digital life erased. But Preston had made one critical, arrogant mistake. He underestimated my memory. He knew I was a brilliant marketer. He'd forgotten that 15 years ago, when we were just a scrappy startup in a rented office, I was the one who designed and built our company's entire network architecture. I knew its backdoors. I knew its forgotten pathways. I knew its ghosts because I had created them. The local public library, with its rows of anonymous computers and free Wi-Fi, became my new office. The smell of old paper and polish was a strange comfort in the chaos. For 3 solid days, from the moment it opened until the moment it closed, I sat in a corner carrel nursing a single cup of lukewarm coffee from my thermos, my fingers flying across the grimy keyboard of a public computer. It was a painstaking, nerve-wracking race against time. I could feel their IT department, my old team, closing the loopholes, patching the very holes I was slipping through. My screen would flicker, a connection would be lost, and I'd have to find another way in, using old administrator passwords I'd set a decade ago and prayed no one had ever bothered to change. My heart pounded with a mixture of fear and adrenaline. Every time a librarian walked past, I was sure I was about to be caught. But on the 3rd afternoon, exhausted and almost ready to give up, I found it. It wasn't in the main marketing directory. It was buried deep in a partitioned server drive, mislabeled as 3rd quarter financial audits. A folder so boring no one would ever look inside. But the name of the single subfolder made the hair on my arm stand up. Project Nightingale. It was a code name Preston and I had joked about years ago for a hypothetical palace coup. He was using our old inside jokes to hide his betrayal. My hand was trembling as I clicked it open. It was all there. A meticulous, cold-blooded plan to oust me, dating back nearly a full year. There were emails between Preston and Cassidy discussing my emotional overinvestment in clients as a critical weakness. There were falsified performance reviews I'd never seen, full of fabricated complaints from anonymous colleagues about my abrasive management style. There were detailed financial projections modeling the company's performance after my departure, with Cassidy at the helm, but it was the other files that made me physically ill. A subfolder labeled Travel and Entertainment. It was full of photos. Dozens of them. Preston and Cassidy at a leadership conference in San Diego, a conference I knew for a fact I was supposed to attend before Preston told me it was canceled last minute due to budget cuts. They were on the beach, laughing, his arm draped possessively around her bare shoulders. A picture of them kissing, the city lights of Chicago twinkling behind them on the balcony of a hotel suite I knew for a fact was booked on the company dime. Receipts for dinners at restaurants that cost more than my monthly car payment. For jewelry. For weekend getaways. All meticulously filed under Client Entertainment. The download bar crept across the screen, agonizingly slow. 98%, 99%. My entire body was tense. Just as the transfer completed and the little icon appeared on my flash drive, the screen went black. A single start message appeared in white text. System alert. Unauthorized access detected. Your IP address has been logged. They'd found me. But it was too late. I calmly pulled the cheap USB drive from the port. On that tiny piece of plastic, tucked safely into the pocket of my jeans, I held their entire conspiracy. I walked out of that library, not as a victim, but as a hunter with a pocket full of ammunition. Preston and Cassidy didn't just fire me. They set out to salt the earth so nothing could ever grow there again. The whispers started almost immediately. A coordinated and vicious smear campaign. I heard them through the grapevine, through the sudden awkward silence when I called former colleagues, through the job interviews that were inexplicably canceled at the last minute. Did you hear about Lorraine? They said she was fired for gross incompetence. Couldn't handle the pressure. No, I heard she was caught padding her expense reports. Apparently, it was thousands of dollars. Someone I trust told me she was having an affair with the CEO of the Campbell account. And when Preston found out, he had to let her go to save the contract. It was diabolical in its precision. They weren't just attacking my work. They were attacking my character, my integrity, the professional reputation I had spent 15 years building with honesty and hard work. It was being systematically dismantled lie by lie. I sent out dozens of resumes. I was overqualified for most of the positions, yet my phone remained silent. The few interviews I did get were tense and strange. The interviewers would look at my stellar resume, then look at me with a kind of pitying suspicion. I was radioactive. The lowest point came when I reached out to Mark, a senior manager I had personally mentored for 5 years. We'd been friends. I'd gone to his wedding, celebrated the birth of his first child. I had championed him, pushed for his last 2 promotions. I called him, my voice stripped of all pride, simply asking if he could act as a professional reference, if he could just speak to my work ethic and character. There was a long, uncomfortable pause. "Lorraine, I can't," he stammered, his voice laced with a discomfort that was almost worse than outright refusal. "Things are really complicated here right now. Preston's made it very clear that, well, that anyone still in contact with you is also having their loyalty questioned." "So, that's it?" I asked, my voice hollow. "After all those years, after everything I did for you, you're just going to let them destroy me with lies?" "I have a mortgage, Lorraine," he said quietly, his voice full of shame. "I have 2 kids in private school. I'm sorry." "I really am," he hung up. That betrayal from someone I had trusted and supported cut deeper than I expected. It was a brutal lesson in corporate survival. When the ship is sinking, the rats don't just flee. They'll chew off your leg to use as a flotation device. But their scorched earth campaign had an unintended side effect. It made them sloppy. They were so focused on assassinating my character and rewriting the past, they didn't pay enough attention to their present. And that's when I decided it was time to stop defending myself and start investigating them. If they were going to accuse me of financial misconduct, I was going to find out where the real rot was. And thanks to the files on my flash drive, I had a pretty good idea exactly where to start digging. I knew I couldn't win this war alone. I needed allies. People who had been wronged by the same regime and who had their own scores to settle. My first call was to Eliza Carter. Finding her wasn't easy. After being forced out, she had practically vanished from the professional world. There was no updated LinkedIn, no new job announcement. It took 2 days of deep diving online, but I finally found her name listed as a part-time bookkeeper for a small family-owned construction company in a dusty industrial park on the outskirts of the city. I walked into the cluttered office, the air smelling of sawdust and coffee. Eliza was sitting behind a metal desk, looking smaller than I remembered. Her once sharp business suits replaced by a faded cardigan. When she saw me, her eyes widened in a mixture of surprise and alarm. We sat in a tiny windowless break room that smelled of microwave popcorn. I laid it all out for her, the ambush, the smear campaign, the evidence I downloaded. She listened intently, her face an unreadable mask. "I can't help you, Lorraine," she said flatly when I finished. She wouldn't meet my eyes. I signed an NDA with a very nasty non-disparagement clause. Preston's lawyer made sure it was ironclad. "He'll sue me into oblivion. I've already lost my career. I can't lose my house, too." "He's already ruined me, Eliza," I said, my voice quiet but intense. "They're not just firing people anymore. They're trying to erase them. You? Me? Who's next? They're building their little empire on our graves." I leaned forward, my eyes locking with hers. "They accused me of stealing. So I started looking. I have the expense reports Cassidy has been filing. The ones for client entertainment dinners for 4 at 5-star restaurants on nights when the client was verifiably in another state. Hotel suites, jewelry." I saw a flicker of something in her eyes. The righteous anger of a fellow accountant who despises sloppy fraud. "He's gotten arrogant," I pressed on. "And she's a fool. She's not just padding expenses anymore. She's committing wire fraud, billing hours to federal contracts for work that was never performed. It's not just mismanagement. It's a felony. And your signature is on the last clean set of books. Mine is on the project she's taking credit for. We are the only 2 people on Earth who can piece the whole ugly story together and prove it." She was silent for what felt like an eternity, her fingers tracing the rim of her styrofoam coffee cup. Finally, she looked up at me, her eyes hard. "When I left," she said slowly, "I made a full encrypted backup of the entire Q2 financial database, as a personal precaution." She reached into her worn leather purse and pulled out a small silver flash drive. "I also have that recording," she added, her voice dropping to a whisper, "of Preston in my exit interview. He didn't just pressure me to sign off on Cassidy's expenses. He explicitly told me to find a way to make the numbers work for her department's quarterly report, and that if I didn't, he'd personally call every headhunter in the state and blacklist me." She slid the flash drive and a tiny audio recorder across the chipped Formica table. "He wanted a war," she said, a grim, dangerous smile spreading across her face for the first time. "Let's give him one." I left her office with more than just evidence. I had my first soldier, and she had just handed me a cannon. My next stop was a quiet diner to meet with 2 other women who had been pushed out in the last year. One was the former head of strategic planning, the other the VP of operations. Over greasy fries and bad coffee, they told their stories. Stories of their ideas being stolen by Cassidy, of their authority being undermined by Preston, of being gaslighted and marginalized until they had no choice but to resign. By the time I left, I had a stack of sworn affidavits and a network of women ready to burn it all down. The offer from Marcus Whitman, the CEO of Meridian Global, our biggest and most respected competitor, felt like a lifeline thrown from a battleship to a woman adrift on a life raft. He called my cheap prepaid phone on a rainy Tuesday afternoon. I was sitting in my car outside Beverly's house, staring at the raindrops tracing paths down the windshield, feeling the familiar weight of hopelessness settle in my chest. "Is this Lorraine Wallace?" a deep, authoritative voice said. I almost didn't answer. I was tired of calls from bill collectors and recruiters who had suddenly gone in a different direction. "This is she," I said, my voice flat. "Lorraine, my name is Marcus Whitman. I'm the CEO of Meridian Global. I hope I'm not disturbing you." I sat bolt upright, nearly choking. It was like getting a call from the president. "Mr. Whitman, hello." "No, not at all. Please call me Marcus, Lorraine. I've been in this business a long time. I know talent when I see it. I also know corporate politics when I smell it. I don't give a damn about the rumors I'm hearing from that sinking ship across town. I care about the 340% increase in digital engagement you delivered last year. I care about the fact that you single-handedly saved the Campbell Industries account from walking out the door. I care about results." Tears pricked my eyes. To be seen. To have my actual work, my accomplishments acknowledged after weeks of being treated like a pariah. It was overwhelming. I had to put my hand over the phone's mouthpiece to stifle a sob. "Portland's business community is smaller than you think," he continued, his voice kind but all business. "Word travels when top-tier talent is suddenly and inexplicably on the market. We're expanding our strategic marketing division. The position is director, but frankly, that's just a starting point. I'm offering you a starting salary that's 30% higher than what I imagine you were making, full creative control, and a budget to build your own team from the ground up." I was speechless. My mind was reeling. "There's one more thing," he said, and I could hear the smile in his voice. "I'll have my corporate lawyer look at your non-compete clause. Given the circumstances of your departure, which I suspect constitute constructive dismissal, I'm willing to bet we can drive a truck through it. You bring me 3 of your former major accounts, and I'll make you vice president within 6 months. What do you say, Lorraine? Are you ready to come play in the major leagues?" Standing in that dreary, rain-soaked driveway, I felt the first real spark of hope ignite into a blazing fire. This wasn't just a job. This was a platform. This was a war chest. This was redemption. "I accept," I said, my voice steady and clear for the first time in weeks. "When can I start?" "Monday," he said. "Welcome to Meridian, Lorraine. I think we're going to do great things together." I ended the call and let out a breath I didn't realize I'd been holding for a month. The game had just changed. I was no longer a desperate, unemployed woman fighting for scraps. I was the incoming director at Meridian Global, and I had an army to build. My next call was to my daughter, Paige. I had tried to shield her from the worst of it, feeding her vague assurances that I was just taking a break. But I needed her now. Not just for her emotional support, but for her skills. "Mom, you sound different," she said, her voice sharp with perception after I told her the news. "You sound like you again." "I have a fight on my hands, sweetheart. A big one. And I need your help." "Anything," she said without a moment's hesitation. Paige was a computer science major, a digital native who was brilliant and tech-savvy in ways I could only pretend to be. That night, over a long, encrypted video call, she became my technical advisor. She walked me through setting up multi-layered security for all my evidence, creating a dead man's switch that would release the files to a journalist if anything happened to me. "If you're going to war, Mom, you need to protect your communications and your assets," she said, her young face set with a grim determination that mirrored my own. Then she hesitated. "Mom, I always knew something was weird with Aunt Cassidy. The way she'd laugh too loud at Dad's jokes. The way she always had to be the center of attention. Last Thanksgiving, she called him prey right in front of everyone." I wanted to throw the entire bowl of cranberry sauce at her head. "Why didn't you say anything?" I asked softly. "Because you seemed happy," she said, her voice small. "And I thought maybe I was just being a jealous teenager." She looked up, her eyes meeting mine through the screen. "But this isn't imagination, is it?" "No, baby," I said, my heart aching for the innocence she had lost. "It's not." I now had my most important ally. The Wallace women were officially going to war. With a new job secured and my evidence safely encrypted and backed up in 3 separate locations, thanks to Paige, it was time to move from defense to offense. Preston and Cassidy thought they were fighting a ghost. They had no idea I was about to bring the whole haunted house down on top of them. My first move was quiet, precise, and aimed directly at the heart of their power structure. It was an email, drafted and redrafted 17 times until every word was a perfectly sharpened, poison-tipped dart. It wasn't an accusation. It was an expression of grave concern regarding potential fiduciary mismanagement and its impact on shareholder value. I sent it from a secure, anonymous email address to a single, very carefully chosen recipient. Sterling Hayes, the longest-serving member of the board, a notorious stickler for ethics, and a man who personally despised Preston's flashy, corner-cutting style. The email didn't mention my name or my scandalous dismissal. It simply laid out a series of troubling data correlations that any competent board member would find alarming. It pointed out, with attached heavily redacted documentation, how the marketing department's budget had seen a 40% increase in discretionary and entertainment spending that directly coincided with Cassidy's promotion. It highlighted, using publicly available data, how client retention numbers, while publicly stable, were being propped up by hiding the quiet loss of 3 mid-level accounts, losses that occurred shortly after their primary contact had left. It noted that employee turnover in that specific department had tripled in 6 months, with exit interviews citing leadership concerns that were, according to HR records I'd managed to glimpse, never addressed or escalated. I attached a single, heavily redacted spreadsheet from Eliza's files, just enough to show that the numbers were real and that I had more. The email was designed to light a small, contained fire in the one place Preston couldn't easily extinguish it: the boardroom. It was a formal invitation for the board to start asking its own questions. My second move was public, designed to create external pressure. I spent an entire weekend crafting an article for LinkedIn. The title was "When Merit Meets Politics, a Case Study in Corporate Leadership Failure." It was a cold, clinical, academic analysis of a hypothetical company where promotions were based on personal relationships rather than professional achievement. I described, with charts and graphs, how such an environment inevitably leads to financial instability, the loss of institutional knowledge, and a toxic culture that drives away top talent. I didn't use a single name or company identifier, but for anyone in the close-knit Portland business world, the parallels would be unmistakable and deeply embarrassing. I scheduled it to publish at exactly noon on Friday, when I knew most executives and industry professionals would be scrolling through their phones during their lunch breaks. Then I waited. The fuse had been lit. The first explosion was set to go off in the boardroom, and the second was set to go off in the court of public opinion. All that remained was to watch it burn. The explosion happened faster and more spectacularly than I could have ever imagined. Sterling Hayes, as I predicted, was a man who hated loose ends and financial ambiguity. On Friday morning, he bypassed Preston entirely and used his authority as the lead independent director to call an emergency board meeting. My old colleague Timothy, a sweet, hardworking kid I had mentored, became my eyes and ears, sending me a rapid-fire series of text messages that had my heart pounding. 7:04 a.m. emergency board meeting just called for 8 a.m. Agenda is listed only as urgent governance matter. Everyone is freaking out. 8:15 a.m. Preston and Cassidy just went into the boardroom. They look like they've seen a ghost. Preston was sweating. 9:02 a.m. They've called Bethany from HR in. The door is closed, but I can hear raised voices. Sterling Hayes is shouting. At exactly noon, as the chaos was unfolding behind closed doors, my LinkedIn article went live. Within 30 minutes, it had nearly 50 comments and had been shared over 100 times. But it wasn't just the numbers. It was the content of the comments. Women and men from across the industry started sharing their own stories of being passed over for the boss's unqualified son or the CEO's new girlfriend. The comment thread transformed into a viral public therapy session for corporate betrayal and nepotism. My story had become their story. But at 2:17 p.m., the comment that mattered most appeared. The one that turned a brush fire into an inferno. It was from Robert Campbell, the powerful and widely respected CEO of Campbell Industries, our most valuable client. He wrote simply, An insightful and troubling analysis. Leadership transitions should never compromise project continuity or client relationships. I am becoming concerned about recent changes affecting our account management. I would appreciate a direct conversation with Lorraine Wallace regarding the ongoing campaigns she initiated. He had tagged me publicly. It was a kill shot. My cheap prepaid phone rang within minutes. It was Robert's direct line. "Lorraine," he said, his voice grim and devoid of pleasantries. "I just found out about your departure this week. This is unacceptable. We have $2 million a quarter invested in strategies you personally developed. I just had a deeply unsettling call with Cassidy. She couldn't answer a single basic question about our target demographics for Q4. She didn't even know we had shifted our focus to the Southwest market." "I'm sure she'll get up to speed," I said, my voice a perfect model of professional neutrality. "There's no time for that," he snapped. "She tried to tell me the new strategy was her idea. I know for a fact you presented it to me yourself 6 months ago. We need you, Lorraine. If you're available for independent consulting, Campbell Industries will retain your services immediately at any price." "Actually, Robert," I said, a slow, triumphant smile spreading across my face, "I've accepted a position with Meridian Global. I start on Monday." There was a stunned pause on the other end of the line, then a hearty, booming laugh. Marcus Whitman finally made a smart move. Good for him. Good for us. Expect a call from my legal team first thing Monday morning. We're moving our account. The first domino had just fallen, and it was a big multi-million-dollar one. If you're still listening to this, and I truly hope you are, would you do me a small favor? Just like this video and type the number 1 in the comments below. It helps more than you know. It tells me that you're here with me on this journey, that my story matters. It's a huge encouragement for me to keep going. So please just type the number 1 so I can see you. And now let me tell you what happened next. After Robert Campbell's call, the dam broke. It was a flood. By 4 p.m., my phone, which had been silent for weeks, was buzzing incessantly. 2 more major clients, Morrison Hotels and Pinnacle Brands, had seen Robert's public comment on LinkedIn and called Preston directly, threatening to pull their multi-million-dollar contracts. They both specifically cited the unacceptable and unexplained loss of their primary strategic contact, me. Preston, clearly in a full-blown panic and demonstrating the poor judgment that was about to become his trademark, did something incredibly stupid. He had Cassidy send out a company-wide email. In it, she attempted to take sole, explicit credit for every major success the company had had in the past year: the Campbell Industries relationship, the Morrison Hotels crisis resolution, the digital marketing overhaul that had won us 2 industry awards. It was a desperate, blatant, and easily disprovable lie. What she didn't realize, what neither of them knew, was that I was 1 step ahead. Earlier that morning, anticipating a move like this, I had sent a little care package from a secure email address to my personal contacts, the VPs of marketing at each of those client companies. The package contained the original, unalterable project files, complete with embedded metadata showing my name as the author, and a full revision history tracking my work over months. Her email didn't make her look like a leader taking charge. It made her look like a fraud and a fool. Around 6 p.m., though, I was in Beverly's quiet guest room, packing the few things I had into my suitcase, preparing for my new life that would start on Monday. I heard a car screech to a halt outside, followed by the sound of a car door slamming. It was Preston. He didn't knock. He stormed up the walkway and pounded on the door like he was trying to break it down. Beverly opened it, a formidable, protective presence blocking his path. "You are not welcome here, Preston." "I need to talk to my wife," he seethed, his face pale and blotchy, trying to push past her. I walked to the doorway, calm and composed. "There's nothing left for us to say." His eyes, when they met mine, were wild with a desperation I'd never seen before. "Lorraine, please," he begged. "You have to stop this. You have to call Robert Campbell back. Tell him it's all a misunderstanding. You're destroying everything we built." "No, Preston," I said, my voice cold and hard as steel. "I'm not destroying what we built. I'm watching you destroy what you and my sister stole." He flinched as if I'd physically slapped him. "That's not fair," he whimpered. "Fair?" I laughed, a bitter, sharp sound that held no humor. "You want to talk about fair? Was it fair when you humiliated me in front of my colleagues? Was it fair when you conspired with my own sister to ruin my career and my reputation? Was it fair when you locked me out of my own bank account and left me with nothing, not even enough for a proper divorce lawyer?" He actually had the gall to look shocked, as if this thought had never occurred to him. "That was Cassidy's idea," he blurted out, his voice rising in panic. She said if we didn't cut you off financially, you'd try to fight back, try to take half of everything. She was just trying to protect the company." The ease with which he threw her under the bus was sickeningly predictable. He wasn't a king. He was just a coward who had briefly worn a crown. "She is not some random girlfriend, Preston. She is my sister," I spat the words at him. "And you? You are my husband. Or at least you were. Lorraine, please," he begged, his voice cracking, all pretense of power gone. He was just a scared little man watching his world crumble. "I'll give you the promotion. I'll give you a 50% raise right now. I'll fire Cassidy tomorrow morning. We can fix this. We can go back to how it was." I just looked at him, at this pathetic broken man groveling on my sister's doorstep. And I felt nothing. The love was gone. The anger had cooled. All that was left was a vast empty pity. "It's too late," I said softly but with absolute finality. "I've already accepted a position at Meridian Global. And Campbell Industries, Morrison Hotels, and Pinnacle Brands, they're coming with me." I took a step back from the door, a silent dismissal. "You should probably go home and talk to your lawyer, Preston. I have a feeling you're going to need one." Beverly, without a word, closed the door gently, but firmly, in his face. The war wasn't over, but I had just won the decisive battle. Monday morning at Meridian Global felt like stepping through a portal into a different universe. The building itself was a statement, gleaming glass and steel that soared into the Portland sky, a testament to success built on competence, not connections. The lobby was filled with light and the quiet hum of purposeful activity. My new office was a corner suite on the 22nd floor, with floor-to-ceiling windows that looked out over the entire city. On clear days, you could see the majestic, snow-capped peak of Mount Hood. It was a view that promised perspective. On the expansive mahogany desk sat a simple, elegant nameplate, Lorraine Wallace, Director of Strategic Marketing. Not someone's wife. Not someone's afterthought. Just my name. My achievement. I sat down in the soft, expensive leather chair, ran my hand across the smooth, clean surface of the desk, and for the first time in what felt like a lifetime, I took a deep, shuddering breath and felt it fill my lungs. The work was a whirlwind, but a wonderful one. My old clients, true to their word, began the process of transitioning their multi-million-dollar accounts. Marcus Whitman was a true leader. He gave me his full support, the resources I needed, and then got out of my way and let me do my job. My new team was a hand-picked group of smart, dedicated, and respectful professionals. They listened to my ideas, challenged them constructively, and executed them brilliantly. They respected me not because I was married to the boss, but because my strategies worked. Within the first month, we had not only secured my old clients, but had also landed a major new account that my old company had been chasing for years. I was not just surviving, I was thriving. But the real bombshell, the one that ended the war for good, dropped on a rainy Tuesday morning, about a month into my new job. The Business Specific. Quarterly, the most respected financial journal in the region, published a front-page exposé by a sharp, relentless investigative journalist named Catherine Volov. The title was The House of Cards, A Story of Nepotism, Fraud and Corporate Decay at Cascade Marketing. Catherine had done her homework. She had taken the breadcrumbs I had given her and had followed the trail all the way to its rotten core. She had spoken to Eliza. She had spoken to the other women I'd connected her with who had been pushed out. She had found a dozen other anonymous sources from inside the company, all telling the same story of a toxic culture of fear and favoritism. She even had the full, unedited audio recording of Preston threatening Eliza. The article laid out in meticulous, damning detail the financial irregularities, the fraudulent expense reports signed by Cassidy, the culture of lies, and the mass exodus of talent. The article never mentioned my name once. I had insisted on it, but it painted a devastatingly clear picture. A once prominent Portland marketing firm being run into the ground by an incompetent, arrogant CEO who had promoted his unqualified mistress, who also happened to be the sister of his highly competent, recently departed wife. The fallout was immediate and catastrophic. The company's stock, which was publicly traded, plummeted 40% in a single day of trading. The remaining board members, led by a furious Sterling Hayes, forced Preston to resign in disgrace to avoid a shareholder lawsuit. Cassidy was fired unceremoniously, escorted out of the building by security with a single box of her belongings, a perfect poetic echo of my own departure. I received a text from my daughter Paige that afternoon. It was a screenshot of Cassidy's LinkedIn profile. Her job title had been updated, seeking new opportunities in strategic marketing. Underneath, a former colleague had left a single brutal public comment. Good luck with that. I didn't feel the rush of giddy victory I might have expected. Instead, I just felt a quiet, profound sense of justice, a sense of order being restored to the universe. They hadn't just lost their jobs. They had lost their reputations. And in the small, insular world of our industry, that was a fate worse than a corporate death sentence. The house of cards they had built on my back had finally spectacularly collapsed. 1 year later, I was no longer a director. I was Meridian's chief marketing officer and its newest board member, the youngest woman ever appointed to the position in the company's 42-year history. Our division's revenue had tripled. Employee satisfaction scores in my department were the highest in the company. I hadn't just rebuilt my career. I had built an empire from the ashes of betrayal. The invitation to be the keynote speaker at the annual Pacific Northwest Marketing Summit was the cherry on top. 3,000 industry professionals, my peers, would be there. The topic they'd asked me to speak on was building ethical and merit-based corporate cultures. The irony was so thick, I could taste it. Standing backstage in the wings, I adjusted the small microphone on my lapel and peeped through the heavy velvet curtain. The auditorium was a vast cavernous space packed to the rafters. And then I saw him. 7 rows back on the aisle, Preston. He looked diminished. That was the only word for it. His once perfectly tailored suit now hung loosely on a frame that had lost a lot of weight. His hair was more gray than I remembered, and his posture was stooped, carrying the invisible weight of failure. He wasn't the powerful, arrogant CEO anymore. He was just another man in a crowd, desperately trying to look like he belonged. Our eyes met for a fleeting second across the crowded room, and he quickly looked down at his program, his face flushing. When they announced my name, the applause was thunderous. It washed over me as I walked onto the stage into the warm, bright lights. I looked out at the sea of faces, at the people who had once whispered rumors about me, and I felt a profound sense of peace. 2 years ago, I began, my voice steady and clear, carrying to the furthest corners of the room. I believed that hard work guaranteed recognition. I believed that excellence would always triumph over politics. I believed that the people closest to us, our family, would be the ones to champion our success rather than steal it. I paused, letting the words hang in the air, letting the weight of them settle. I was wrong. And that painful public lesson taught me something invaluable. Meritocracy isn't something that just happens naturally. It's something we have to build, protect, and defend fiercely, every single day. For 45 minutes, I laid out my blueprint for success. I shared case studies for Meridian's incredible growth. I talked about creating environments of psychological safety. I spoke about the tangible bottom-line value of integrity. I never mentioned his name. I never mentioned his company. I didn't have to. Everyone in that room knew the story behind the story. The standing ovation lasted 4 full minutes. As I walked off stage, my heart soaring, my phone buzzed in my pocket. It was a text from an unknown number. From him, "Lorraine, please." 5 minutes. I just need to explain. To apologize. I looked at the message for a long moment. Then I deleted it without responding. There was nothing left to explain. There was nothing left to apologize for. He was part of my history, not my destiny. A few weeks later, Marcus Whitman called me into his office. "Lorraine," he said, a strange, knowing smile on his face. "I have an unusual situation. We've been approached about an acquisition." He pushed a thick folder across his desk. The name on the tab was Cascade Marketing, Preston's old company, or what was left of it. After he was ousted, the company had entered a death spiral. They were now bankrupt, desperate for a buyer to absorb their few remaining assets and massive debt before liquidation. "The board wants you to lead the acquisition team," Marcus said, watching my face carefully for a reaction. "You know their client list and their liabilities better than anyone." And so, a week later, I found myself sitting at the head of that same long mahogany conference table, in that same room where my life had been torn apart. But this time, I wasn't the one being judged. My legal team from Meridian flanked me. Across the table, Preston and what remained of his board sat like defendants awaiting sentencing. And next to him, looking thin and nervous, her expensive clothes now looking cheap and ill-fitting, was my sister Cassidy. She was there as a major shareholder. Her stock now worthless. The terms of the acquisition are non-negotiable, I began, my voice cool and professional as I opened the folder. Meridian will absorb your 3 remaining profitable client contracts. We will not be taking on any of your outstanding debt. As for personnel, I paused and pulled out 2 single-page documents I had asked our lawyer to prepare myself. These executive positions are redundant and will be eliminated immediately, with no severance, as per the bankruptcy filing. Preston's name was on the first one. Cassidy's name was on the second, under her now worthless title of shareholder. Her head snapped up, her eyes wide with a mixture of disbelief and fury. "You can't do this!" she hissed across the table, her voice cracking. "After everything? I'm your sister. You owe me." I looked at her, really looked at her, for the first time in 2 years. I saw the petty jealousy that had curdled into malice, the bottomless greed that had erased all sense of loyalty or love. And I felt nothing but a distant clinical pity. "Cassidy," I said, my voice devoid of all personal emotion, addressing her as I would any failed business associate. "From a strategic and financial perspective, you bring no value to our organization." I picked up my pen, the same elegant fountain pen Marcus had given me when I made CMO. I signed both termination papers with a steady, confident hand. "The meeting is concluded. Our legal team will handle the remainder of the transition." I stood up, gathered my documents, and walked out of that room, leaving them to the ruins of the kingdom they had stolen. I didn't do it for revenge. I did it because it was the right business decision. And that, I realized, was the most absolute and satisfying victory of all. In the years that followed, my life blossomed in ways I could never have imagined when I was crying on a lumpy motel bed. Paige graduated summa cum laude from college, her groundbreaking thesis on ethical leadership in modern corporations winning national acclaim. She turned down offers from a dozen top firms to join my team at Meridian, not because she was my daughter, but because she was the most brilliant, creative young strategist I had ever met. Together, the Wallace women were a force of nature, building something incredible, something lasting. My relationship with my sister Beverly grew closer than ever. She was my staunchest ally and my dearest friend. My parents? Well, that relationship remained complicated. They never fully apologized or acknowledged the depth of the harm they'd done. But in their old age, there was a quiet, regretful understanding in their eyes that they had backed the wrong horse. I learned to accept their flawed love for what it was and moved on. As for Preston and Cassidy, their stars didn't just fall. They vanished into a black hole of their own making. Preston, with his reputation in tatters, tried to start a small consulting firm, but no one would hire him. The last I heard, he was selling extended car warranties out of a cubicle in a strip mall in the suburbs. Cassidy, unable to hold down a job, eventually moved back in with our parents, her bitterness a constant toxic presence in their home. But my life was no longer defined by them or by my reaction to them. It was defined by my work, by my wonderful daughter, and by a new, unexpected purpose I discovered quite by accident. It started small. I began quietly mentoring young women who reached out to me on LinkedIn after my keynote speech became legendary in the industry. Women who were stuck in toxic work environments, who were being gaslighted, whose ideas were being stolen, who were being told they were too emotional or too ambitious. I'd listen to their stories, which were all variations on my own. I'd give them advice, help them polish their resumes, and when I saw real untapped talent, I'd make a quiet call to a contact and open a door. It grew into something bigger, something more meaningful than any marketing campaign. I used a significant portion of my now substantial earnings and stock options to establish the Wallace Foundation, a nonprofit dedicated to providing free legal aid, career coaching, and networking support for women facing workplace discrimination and harassment. We helped women fight illegal NDAs, negotiate fair severance packages that allowed them to land on their feet, and find new jobs in companies that would value them. One evening, I was at a fundraiser for the foundation. The room was buzzing with the energy of hundreds of women, lawyers, doctors, artists, executives, all of whom had been touched by our work in some way. A young woman came up to me, her eyes shining with unshed tears. Her name was Grace. We had helped her leave an emotionally abusive boss a year prior, and now she was a rising star, a VP at a major tech firm. "You don't just give advice, Lorraine," she said, grabbing my hand, her grip surprisingly strong. "You give people their power back. You don't just open doors, you teach us how to build our own. You changed my life." Looking at her, At all the powerful, resilient women in that room whose lives we had touched, I finally understood. The betrayal, the pain, the public humiliation, it wasn't the end of my story. It was the crucible that had forged me into the woman I was always meant to become. My true legacy wasn't the titles on my business card or the numbers on my balance sheet. It was this. It was the ever-widening circle of women helping other women, turning their pain into purpose, their scars into strength. Preston and Cassidy had tried to bury me deep in the cold, dark earth. They never imagined that they weren't at a funeral. They were at a planting. Thank you so much for listening to my story. If it resonated with you in any way, if you've ever felt overlooked, underestimated, or betrayed, please know that you are not alone. And know that your greatest strength is often forged in your deepest pain. I'd be honored if you would share your own thoughts or a piece of your own story in the comments below. I read every single one, and they give me strength. Take care of yourselves and each other.